Hey everyone, it's Allie, and today I want to talk about Endgame and Last Epoch. Now, this is a topic that I think a lot of people are going to care about, as typically in ARPGs, the single most important thing is going to actually be the endgame. A game might have a decent level of experience and fun classes, but if there's not much endgame to actually play in it, or if the endgame isn't very enjoyable, then most people are going to get bored of the RPG. Now, in my opinion, I think Last Epoch's current endgame is wonderful. Now, some people have said that the current endgame of Last Epoch is a little bit lackluster and they wish they could have more content. And I know a lot of people like to compare it to Path of Exile. But at the same time, we also have to take it with a grain of salt as we're comparing a game that's been able to just consistently add new content every season for the past 10 years to a game that's only just about to come out. That's still not an excuse for Last Epoch. And with the release of the game on February 21st, they are going to be adding a massive amount of extra endgame into the game with the release of Season 1. Now, unfortunately, nobody can tell you what's actually currently in Season 1, as most people don't really know. And the people that do know have a content embargo until the 19th, so we won't fully be able to tell you and talk about Season 1 content until just before the release of the game. With that said, I still want to talk about everything that currently is in the game, and I honestly think that the current content in the game is more than enough for most people, and it's really fun. And if you're someone who does play, for example, Path of Exile, since a lot of my community does play PoE, this endgame is going to be very reminiscent of what PoE's endgame is like. The first thing I'm going to want to talk about is going to be Monoliths of Fate. This is going to be the piece of content they're going to mostly be interacting with, and if we put it in PoE terms, it's going to feel very reminiscent of maps in Path of Exile. Monoliths of Fate are going to start you off in Fall of the Outcasts as your first zone, and you're going to have to slowly progress through all of the different monoliths all the way to the top until you get to Spirits of Fire, Last Ruin, and Age of Winter. Once you beat the 3 monoliths at the top once, you'll be able to go to the center right here, and you'll be able to turn on empowered monoliths. As we can see here, if I click on this monolith, I have 2 options. I have the normal option and the legendary option. The legendary option is simply just empowered monoliths, and it just sets all of the different zones to level 100, meaning that once you do get to endgame, all these zones will be viable endgame monoliths for you to farm. But before that point, they will be lower level. For example, Fall of the Outcast will be 58, Black Sun will be 66, and so on and so forth, scaling all the way to level 90, but eventually they will all be level 100. Now, these monoliths are going to be very fun to do. Each separate monolith is going to have its own echo web, as we see here. And the echoes are simply just all the islands that you see connected to each other. These echoes, when we want to talk about them in PoE terms, are effectively just maps. There's going to be a random layout with random monsters and random objectives. The objectives in these is not always going to be the same thing as it is in PoE, where it's just do whatever mechanics you see along the way and kill the boss. Sometimes in these echoes, you might be asked to kill a bunch of elites, maybe charge up a monolith while enemies are running at you, or to potentially kill some spires that are bombarding you with AoEs throughout your whole echo journey. Now, as we can see here on the right, if we were to do this echo, we would be gaining glyphs and timeline stability as rewards, as well as be gaining item rarity and experience for 6 following echoes. The way modifiers on these work is in a stacking fashion. So for example here, if I did this one, my next 6 echoes would have enemies that have high health, 36% less damage, while also gaining some rarity and experience. As we can see over here on the left, these are the current modifiers that have. So if I were to go do this echo, not only would enemies take less damage at high health, but every enemy would also have a 63% chance to receive a glancing blow. Rare enemies would have high speed and crit chance until we get near them, and they would have 92% increased physical damage. And these are all going to stack together, but at the same time, the rarity and experience is also going to stack together, meaning that if we do want to pursue difficult mods, we are going to be rewarded with it as well for more rarity and more experience. As you can see, based on the icons everywhere, you're going to get different rewards based on what you're actually doing. And every single monolith, and the reason you'd want to do different monoliths, has their own unique rewards. So for example, if we look over here at Ending the Storm, we can see that there are going to be nodes throughout the different echoes that are going to guarantee us either a unique or set pair of gloves. So endgame, once you do get to empowered monoliths, you would want to pick whichever zone you want to farm based on what the target thing that there is there. So let's talk more about the stability. So as you do nodes, and the further and further away you get from the center, the more stability you're going to get. You're going to fill up the bar at the top, and this is going to be very important as you're progressing. If you were to look at the normal version of it here, not the empowered version, as we can see, if we look at a node right next to the beginning, we're going to get 10 timeline stability. But if we were to do a node all the way out here, we would get 21 stability. Your goal when initially progressing and getting to empowered monoliths is to fill up this bar and to do the quest echoes that you have available here. Now you're going to have to do these in order, and then once I get 250 stability, I'd be able to do the second quest echo, and finally at 450 stability, I'd be able to do the last one. Now, I could bank up 450 stability and then just do all of them at once, but I wouldn't recommend to do that, as actually doing Drowned would give me a little bit of stability to work my way towards the next one. Once you do get to the final one, you're going to be fighting a boss, and all of these different monoliths are going to have their own unique boss that has their own unique drop table, which means once you get to empowered monoliths, you would have a reason to farm them. For example, in Reign of Dragons, the boss has an item that quite a lot of builds want as a defensive layer, so typically a lot of people end up farming Reign of Dragons just as their end game option and just for the sake of getting that item to be able to play their build. And once you do fight the boss and win against it, you'll be given an option between a few glyphs, and these glyphs are going to be determined based on the zone that you're in. Now, these glyphs, some of them will give you increased bonuses to non-combat stats. So for example, in Fall of the Outcast, I have a blessing that is giving me 44% increased chance for large idols to drop. Well, some of these will give you a direct combat bonus. For example, in Spirits of Fire, I have a blessing that's giving me 51% increased minion damage. Eventually, later on, you are going to want to go and farm all these bosses to get exactly what you want in all of these. And these also have a role to them. So even if you don't want anything from the bosses, you might want to go and farm specific bosses to hunt for specific blessings and to hunt for good rolls on them. Sometimes, as you're progressing along, you might encounter nodes that look something like this. And as you can see on the right side, we'll be seeing the boss Orobyss himself. Now, if you were to do these nodes, they would completely reset your echo web back to square one. So it would end up looking something like this, where you only have a few nodes at the start and nothing else. It's going to completely randomize every single node that you have on the echo web itself. Now, Orobyss isn't really something that you're going to care about before you get to empowered monoliths. What he's going to do is he's going to give you a lot of stability. So I would recommend for you to do him for stability itself. But the other thing that he's going to give you, and the reason we mostly care about Orobyss, is going to be the corruption. Corruption is the main endgame mechanic that is going to make these monoliths scale up to your strength. Each 2 points of corruption is going to make it so enemies have 1% more health and 1% more damage. Now, while you're progressing along, you can only have a total maximum of 50, and this is not going to be something they're going to worry about, as you're going to want to get to empowered monoliths because your corruption, first off, starts at 100, and 2 has no maximum, meaning you can make the game as hard as possible. As we can see here, in Ending of the Storm, I currently have 176 corruption, meaning that enemies have 88% more health and deal 88% more damage. Once you do get to empowered monoliths, the difference now is that every time I fight the boss in empowered monolith, I'd be gaining 1 gaze of Orobyss. And what this does is when I go and actually fight an Orobyss, it would consume all my gaze of Orobyss. So if I fail, I just lose them. But as we can see here, I'd gain 18 additional corruption from the gaze of Orobyss. So even if you don't want to fight the boss within a given empowered monolith, but you want to farm it because you want whatever unique nodes it has to offer compared to the other ones, you'd still want to do the boss every time you get enough stability just to build up Gaze of Orobyss to be able to scale your corruption a lot faster if that's something you want to actually do. The other thing to mention as well about gaining corruption is the further away that an Orobyss is from the center, the more corruption you're going to get. So for example, if you were to look at this Orobyss right here, I'd gain 4 corruption with 10 bonus corruption. If you were to look at this Orobyss that's all the way over here, it'd be 4 corruption with 15 bonus corruption. Now, the corruption itself is not going to scale because I'm only at corruption 106. But for example, if I was at corruption 200, the base corruption from this one would be something like 15, while the base corruption from this one would only be 5. Now, the other question is, where is this bonus corruption actually coming from? So the game has a built-in catch-up system. For example, in Blood, Frost, and Death, I only have 106 corruption. But if we were to go over to, for example, Black Sun and go look at Black Sun, we can see that in Black Sun, I have a total of 195 corruption. I've progressed Black Sun substantially more. But let's say I'm done getting whatever I need out of Black Sun, and now I need to go farm Blood, Frost, and Death for whatever I can get here. Well, instead of making you slowly and painfully up your corruption from 0 once again, because some of my other monoliths are substantially more progressed, I am going to get a bunch of bonus corruption until the total corruption in this area is roughly equivalent to whatever my highest corruption zone is. So there's a tiny built-in catch-up system, and I really appreciate it, especially because it stacks with the gaze of Orobyss, meaning that I can get quite a lot of corruption very quickly from a starting point of 100. And as before, if you just simply want to reset your echo web, if you don't actually care about the corruption, you can just go do an Orobyss and all of the echo web they currently have unlocked will be reset. Now, one thing you might be asking about this as well, if I go to this Orobyss and I can't really do anything more than 100 corruption, let's say you're farming very comfortably at whatever corruption you've set for yourself and you don't want to go any higher or any lower, doing these might kind of suck because it's going to give you corruption and you don't want to make the game harder. Well, once your corruption does get substantially high enough, so for example, in this case, I have 195 corruption. As you can see here, I immediately have a node at the start that is going to allow me to reduce my corruption. So this means that I can go ahead and fight an Orobyss and it might give me 10 additional corruption, but I can immediately wash it away by reducing it if I don't want my corruption to be as high. The other thing to mention as well is that any Orobysses that spawn very close to center are actually going to give you negative corruption, meaning you can very easily, if you were to get a massive spike of 20, 30, 40 corruption, quickly just do a few nodes, get an Orobyss that's somewhere very close to the center, and just tank your corruption that way, or just do a few of these nodes that specifically cleanse your corruption away. Overall, I think the way monoliths are set up is a really great system, and I think that just the fact that you're able to set your own difficulty and the fact that these have a scaling difficulty makes these really fun to do. And if I were to compare them to PoE, I personally like them a lot more than PoE because they effectively have built-in delve mechanics where you can scale the content to as much as you want to be able to push your build as far as you want. So if you want to have an easy time, you can just farm low corruption, or if you want to push your build to the limit and see how far it can go, you can push corruption and farm at a higher level while at the same time being rewarded for doing more difficult content. I personally really like that. The whole reward structure of harder content equals more loot and harder content equals the loots that you want to see more commonly. And I think this by itself is just a really fun way of progressing in Endgame. That's all we really have to talk about for the Endgame and Last Epoch. Personally, I think all of it is really good, and I'm excited to see what is going to come with the launch of the game. I'm excited what Season 1 is going to bring. I think that no matter what is currently here is more than enough for people to enjoy, and simply due to the fact that you can re-progress through this on every single character, gives you quite a lot of longevity and makes it really fun to have a way to progress through Endgame on every character that you make, and to be able to have a fulfilling experience all the way from the start of your character all the way until Endgame to bring get insane items for whatever build you're playing. I think it offers a fulfilling experience, and it is up to 11th hour to not drop the ball and to keep adding fulfilling and fun endgame content. If you have any other questions, please feel free to leave in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to answer you as soon as I can. And if you want to come by my Twitch, I'm going to be streaming Last Epoch, and I'm going to be doing quite a lot of endgame pushing, both for the few weeks leading up to the launch of the game on February 21st, and for a month or two after the game comes out while we wait for the next Path of Exile season to start up. As always, if you want to ask me any questions live, you're more than free to come by my Twitch and ask them there. If you just want to come hang out with the cuties, I'll be more than happy to see you around. Other than that, hope you enjoy the rest of the day, and I'll see you cuties in the next video.